I am back on a Tuesday because we had our first blizzard in Saskatchewan, which means my schedule disappeared and we had a snow day, and it was actually kind of great. It was kind of great being locked up in house, which honestly isn't all that different during this pandemic anyway, except it was cold. But I wanted to start the week off by talking about a few books that I've read recently that I really, really enjoyed. Now, some of you know I am an avid reader, although this year my reading amount has dropped off quite substantially. In the past, I've committed to reading 52 books a year. I'm pretty sure I've been doing that since 2015 or 2016. And before that, I still read. I just wasn't tracking it or trying to, make some goal or whatever. Now, it's not so important to me. This is just a little aside before I get to the books. It's not so important that I hit the number. It's not about devouring. Well, I mean, I love devouring as many books as I can, but it's not about just arbitrarily reaching this goal. It's more just to be in the habit of reading regularly enough to the extent that I am reading about 52 books a year, which is obviously there's 52 weeks in a year, and that's about a book a week. So that's the rate of book consumption that I really enjoy, that I find continually feeds my mind with fresh ideas and inspiration, things to think about. And I read across a wide variety of topics. But anyway, this year I'm not doing so well, I guess by that standard. I think I've read about 38 books this year. You guys can go add me on Goodreads if you want. If you want to be friends on Goodreads, I think my profile is Allysia K or something like that. But anyway, I'm catching up because I've been in a reading frenzy lately, and I don't expect this to let up anytime soon. And part of the reason that I've really re-engaged with reading lately is because I've read some really great books lately. And the first one that I want to talk to you guys about is this book by Michael Greger called How to Survive a Pandemic. Now, I am a huge fan of Michael Greger. I've read everything he's written, I think. So he's written two very dense nutritional books. One is How Not to Die and the other is How Not to Diet. I have devoured these books. I love them. How Not to Diet came out early, the very beginning of this year, around Christmas time. And it's basically, he's just a really interesting person. He has a website called nutritionfacts.org, and all the profits that he makes from his books and from his speaking engagements go to charity. So I like that he tries to separate himself from profit, because obviously if you're profiting from books, there's the objection that you could make that you're not an objective person. So someone selling a diet book has the agenda to sell their diet book regardless of the facts. So he's tried to take his own personal profit out of the equation in order to keep things as objective as possible, and I just really connect with him as a person. I think he's a really cool guy. A couple books that he's written that you can read, because they're pretty short and you can read them for free online. One of them is called Heart Failure, Diary of a Third-Year Medical Student. So good. A really, heart-centered approach on being a doctor in the United States. It's moving. It's profound. It's a little bit poetic. It's very beautiful. And then he also wrote a book called Carbophobia, which I believe has been rebranded about something to do with the Atkins diet. But basically it's just a giant slam on the Atkins diet backed up with lots of facts. Very good read. So anyways, I've loved everything he's written. So when I found out that he had written a book about pandemics, I was surprised because I hadn't heard about it. And I'm usually in the loop with the things that this guy's doing. So he does have a background, epidemiologist, I think. So this is a book that he wrote some time ago, but published recently with a whole bunch of new information. And the reason that I love this book, first of all, it's dense. I mean, also the last third of this entire book is just footnotes. But it's Michael Greger doesn't go light when he writes a book. He doesn't write like a light kind of fluffy read. It's packed. It's packed with information. It's really intense, but I found it completely engrossing and also completely terrifying. Because the reality of this book, even though it's called How to Survive a Pandemic, it's less about the survival part and more about this is real bad part. Reading this book makes me feel like COVID-19 is a dry run and like a rehearsal of a much worse pandemic that can happen and probably will happen if all the leading virologists and stuff are to be believed. Because basically it seems like anyone who knows anything about this subject is like, I lose sleep over the idea of H5N1 getting loose and basically the virus learning how to spread effectively. So what really scares me about this book, and why I would encourage you to read it, it's really interesting, but what really scares me is the idea that, well, the worst influenza that or pandemic that ever happened was the 1918 influenza, commonly called the Spanish flu. It was an H1N1 virus, and it killed 500 million people. And that was with a mortality rate of about 2.5%, which is extremely high for influenza. Just as a comparison, regular seasonal influenza has a mortality rate of less than 0.1%. So the 1918 flu was the worst flu that had ever hit the globe, ever. Like, the most deaths that have ever happened with a pandemic was the 1918 one. And that was with a mortality rate of 2.5%. So far, as of this recording, COVID-19 has killed 1.27 million people. So it's not in the same ballpark of the 1918 one at this point. Thankfully, the mortality rate is quite a bit lower for COVID-19. But with something like H1N1, which has so far infected over 700 people, the virus has not learned how to spread efficiently yet. It has not learned how to spread at the rate of something like COVID-19. But it has an intensely lethal mortality rate of over 60%. So people who, it's mind-boggling how bad this could be if the virus is allowed to continually reproduce and recirculate and learn how to infect humans more efficiently, which it seems like will probably happen basically because of wet markets and factory farming. And a good portion of this book talks about that specifically. So my takeaway is we're kind of screwed. I don't know, we're kind of screwed, guys. I don't know what to take away from it, what hope to take away from it, because I don't see factory farms going away anytime soon. But at the very least, we can educate ourselves about this. And I think it's like reading this book was a really good step for me and has opened a little bit of a Pandora's box. There's a lot more that I want to learn about this now. It's definitely piqued my curiosity. Anyway, I'll put that aside. Now, the other two books that I wanted to mention, very different in quality. All three of these books are wildly different one to the next. But and I read them digitally, so I don't have like a hard copy book to flaunt in front of the camera. But one I just finished is called Disloyal, which is a memoir by Michael Cohen, who was Donald Trump's personal attorney for about a decade. Now, if I didn't have to be a parent, if I didn't have that responsibility, I would have destroyed this book in a day, easily. Instead, I read it over the span of about 3 days. Very compelling. I was all swept up in the election, as many people in the world were. And I was thinking of a way to put that obsessive energy to good use, which usually if I'm very invested in something, I get very interested in something, it's the perfect time to pick up books on that subject because I'm just going to absorb it. I'm going to be really engaged with it. So I like to follow the waves of my obsession, and I think I'm going to keep doing so with the next set of books that I end up picking. But the reason that I picked up Disloyal, out of all of the Trump books that have been written, like Rage was another one that I still might read. I'm not sure. I don't know if I want to read anything more about Donald Trump, but I do want to read more about politics in general. But the reason that I picked up Michael Cohen's book, partly because it's very new, it was written this year in 2020, but also because of the point of view, the perspective. So it's different when you read something from someone's close confidant for a decade versus reading something written by a journalist on the outside looking in. I was really attracted to the idea of having what is the point of view of someone who was in. Now, another thing that I really liked about this book is Michael Cohen's narrative is definitely an antagonist. He's a self-aware antagonist. So he admits throughout the book that the things he was doing throughout his entire tenure with Trump was vile, terrible. He lied, he scammed people, etc. And he admits it. So it's an interesting point of view someone being on the inside, someone doing terrible things, and then being able to say with open eyes that the things he did were terrible and outlining them nonetheless. There's a certain amount of courage, I think, that comes along with that I admire and am a little horrified by. So really interesting read. It's it's Trump, man. This is probably not going to be a lot of surprises, but it did give me a little bit more to go on. I learned a little bit more about some of the scandals that I was reading about in the last 4 years and even before that. So finally, totally different note again, a third book that I've read recently, and I actually listened to the audiobook, but I'm sure the print book would be great too, is a book called The Untethered Soul. Now, I want to say there's a lot of people who love Eckhart Tolle and The Power of Now, and a bunch of other books. I can't remember all their titles, but I did try to read, since everyone seems to love The Power of Now, I tried picking up this book, and I could not get through the first chapter. Like after the first chapter, I was like, no, just not for me. And that's no criticism if you guys are into Eckhart Tolle. It's just, it's so fluffy. I'm sure there's some really great, valuable information contained in it, but it's so out in space. And I like exploring personal development concepts and spiritual concepts, but I like them best when they're tethered to reality a little bit more, when they're anchored in language that feels more practical to me. And that's what I found The Untethered Soul was. It felt like it was a sort of on the same level, like a kind of a spiritual, philosophical book that basically just discusses happiness and living in the moment and things like that, but in language that I felt did not make me cringe. It was profound too. I felt that particularly the later chapters. I had a moment. I was cleaning my house and listening to this audiobook, which is the mark of a good audiobook, you guys. If you're like, I want to keep listening to this, but I don't want to just like sit around and listen to an audiobook, I might as well clean my house. That's a sign that you're engaged with the content. So anyway, I'm cleaning my house. I'm like scrubbing the tub. And it's the like 15th chapter, maybe the 16th chapter. And it just gave me this eye-opening realization of, I mean, nothing in the book feels new. It's all like, oh yeah, of course. That's like a very simple message. I feel like if I were to convey that, forgiveness is like concepts of forgiveness and self-love and things like that. It sounds like a Hallmark card if I'm to convey it to you. But it's sort of like the inner experience that I was having, especially when I was listening to the ideas in chapter 15 and 16 about death. I find death as a really useful framing tool. So he was talking about how what if you use the frame, what if you had a conversation with someone knowing that it was going to be the last conversation you'd have in your life, knowing that it was all going to be over after that? How would you relate to that conversation differently? How would you relate to the person differently? And the thing is if we're given a death sentence, or not a death sentence, but if we're told, say we have 3 months to live, then all of a sudden we start relating to the world differently, as if we haven't already been dying all of this time. So the idea is, why would you wait until the last moment to really be in the moment, to really appreciate what is here right now, to really sink into that conversation, to really love the person you're engaging with, and so forth. And something in that just really gave me this like beautiful light bulb moments, this beautiful heart opening moments. And I've been reflecting on that ever since. I think I just finished it last week, so I'm still kind of sitting with it. But those 3 books have made a really big impact on me, and I wanted to share them with you guys. I'd love to hear any book recommendations from you as well. Most of the books I read are recommendations from other people, so I like being able to read books that I know other people have read, and then we can talk about it. It makes it more fun. So anyway, thank you for hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye, guys.